In 2023, we live a great deal of changes. We live in an era where political, social, economic affairs are actually dictating the way that alliances are being shaped. The current state of affairs is changing. Today I'm going to have the pleasure and honor to have Professor Farid Mirbagheri to discuss about the challenges and the changes ahead of us in the Middle East and West Asia. My name is Mario Eftimiopoulos and I'm the head of Strategy International. And this is Prime Analysis. Professor Farid, welcome to this show, this Prime Analysis. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
I know that you've been a professor at the University of Nicosia for more than 25 years, if I'm correct, and you're also senior consultant here at Strategy International.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Let me go straight to the point. What is the current state of affairs in the Middle East and West Asia? Where are we located now?
I'm afraid it's not a very rosy picture. We have hotspots all over the place. Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Iran. All these are troubled regions. In Syria, we have one of the, if not the biggest, civil war in human history. In Yemen, we've had an ongoing conflict. In Iraq, we had a period that was without a government until last year. And now we'll see how it's going to develop. There may be new elections this year. Lebanon, again, it was a case when we didn't have government for a long time. Now we'll see how this will move on. Syria, its fate, sadly, still is undecided, and the tragedy continues. Iran is got an economy in crisis, and its political situation is unstable. Socially, people are very angry. The country is isolated internationally, and the prospect of change in that country can have ramifications all over the region. We also have the nuclear issue with Iran, which is as yet unresolved, and that can potentially lead to greater conflicts. Israel itself domestically does not look very stable. The new government is a coalition, and we have seen in recent weeks the unrest in protest to what the government is proposing to do to the judicial system. And of course, the lingering Arab-Israeli conflict, which has now almost taken the back seat compared to whatever else that is taking place in the region. So overall, it's not a very rosy picture, I'm afraid.
We live in an era, in the way that you have described it so far, we live in an era that is actually in a very realistic state of flux. I just want to pick up on one point. You mentioned at some point that Syria is in a dire situation, but lately we've seen Syria having, and its president Bashar al-Assad, visiting the United Arab Emirates. And it seems that he's either trying, or the Middle Eastern states, the Arab states, are trying to bring Bashar al-Assad inside a discussion, if you want, on Arabism and the connections with it. What do you make of this?
Well, I'd say there are shifting. Now, I just want to be careful with the term alliances. There may be shifting partnerships. Mm-hmm. Maybe alliances is a bit too strong a word for that. The war in Ukraine has somewhat confused the situation even more. As you have noted, many of the countries in the region have not taken the robust stand that Europe and America have taken against Russia. Yes. In fact, last October, Saudi Arabia, in unison with Russia, decided to cut down oil production by 2 million barrels a day, which was something Americans were not happy at all with. That was to push the prices of gas further up, so Russia would benefit from that. We have this for the first time in the history of the region, that this dependence on the West, in particular on the US, by the regional countries, can no longer be taken for granted as 100%. Of course, the sophisticated weaponry of the United States cannot be matched by any country. And still, the United States guarantees the free passage of energy, even for China and other parts of the world. That will continue to be the case. But as one Saudi high official put it to one Western journalist, the relationship of Saudi Arabia with the United States is not a Catholic marriage, is rather a Muslim marriage. That is married to America, but Saudi Arabia can have more wives, not just one. There is an agreement with Iran mediated by China. As I said, the example of working in unison with Russia over oil production cuts. This shows that now countries can chart somewhat independent way as they see fit to protect their interests. However, I should repeat that the United States is the supreme military power that the region still depends on for their overall security.
Thank you very much. I mean, you mentioned a great deal of things, which I have a great deal of questions, actually. So let me just take it one by one, maybe to take it geographically, or take it to the most recent. You mentioned Saudi Arabia, but you did not mention just yet the rapprochement that is taking place between Iran and Saudi Arabia at a time not only of petrol prices, but an ongoing war, as you said, with Ukraine, and at the same time the non-ending story on where does war end, how a new market is reshaped economically, energy security, trade relations. We now have a banking system that has been developing. We have a technological not revolution, but actually I would say fluctuation with regards to what is capable of not on operational terms. And this is global. It's a global phenomenon. So suddenly we see a new, or a possibility of a new discussion, if I may say, not on alliance, as you correctly put, but rather a strategic discussion between Iran and Saudi Arabia. My first question is, how do you envision this taking shape? And my second question, and then I'll pick up on a third question, is if this goes through, how will this impact the Middle East?
I see it going through with great difficulty. The two countries are ideological rivals and also real political rivals. One championing the Sunni Islam, the other championing the Shia Islam. They have issues with one another in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Syria and Iraq.
The metropolises of engagement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
However, I think in a way what brought them now, this rapprochement together, goes partly to the Iranian nuclear issue. As the West has shown unwillingness to take a more robust, stronger action against Iranian nuclear program, Israel is talking more and more of a unilateral military strike against Iranian facilities. In fact, a few days ago, or maybe 2 days ago, a high official of Israeli government stated openly that the US and some European countries have been informed that should Iran continue its uranium enrichment of 60% and plus, Israel may well attack the nuclear sites. Should that happen, Iranians will try to respond, and the only way they can respond is with drones and missiles. And Saudi oil installations would be a prime target for them, as they have in the past.
I have a question on this.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I'm just stopping you in this case, but
Yep.
you're opening the discussion on Israel, and a very logical question that comes into one's mind is, how does Israel react on this Iranian-Saudi rapprochement? Let us assume that it goes through. What is the impact on Saudi? May I say on Israel relations with regards to the Gulf, namely with the Abrahamic Accords? And secondly, and most importantly, and this is a tricky question, is the enemy of my enemy my friend? And I'm saying because Saudi Arabia does not have any open relationship with Israel so far, and Iran definitely doesn't have any relationship with Israel. And not only that, but they threaten each other. So what do you say on this?
Well, just continuing, which would address your question, Israel, to protect itself against Iranian attack, possible Iranian response on its oil installations, is trying to mend fences with Iran to partially protect itself from such a scenario. Israel is not particularly happy. Yes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's how some Arab countries went to and signed Abraham Accords, because Iran was the enemy that had shown it is capable of targeting.
But the Abrahamic Accords were not about Iran. They were born about cultural, multi-religious dialogue and element. But you're putting the Abrahamic Accord as a response. I took it on a different way, that Iran and Saudi Arabia are approaching each other on the basis that Iran wants to showcase that I'm doing an alliance with someone that does not yet recognize, the Israel as a state, or Israel as a country that has a power to be. So that's when I'm asking, is the enemy of my enemy my friend?
Yes, it is, absolutely. But no, I would here maybe partially disagree with you that, no, I think the rapprochement between Israel and some Arab countries, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, well, Sudan less so than the others, has partially to do with the situation of Iran, and that some of the Arab states feel threatened by Iran.
But shouldn't they be? I mean, Yemen war is all about influence of Iran into the heart of Pan-Arabism.
No, they should be. I mean, it's not for me to say, but it is understandable that they feel concerned about that, and Israel has capitalized on that, and has had relations, even with Saudi Arabia, even though it does not have diplomatic relations, but Saudi airspace now is open to Israeli civil aviation.
So you're claiming that they picked up on the opportunity.
Absolutely.
To promote the Abrahamic Accord. But there is another voice, especially coming from the United States, saying that the Abrahamic Accord has been on the making for many years. And in fact, for those of us, and you have a great experience into this, the making of an alliance or the making of a strategic relationship takes years to be handled. And it seems that the United States, when it did it with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and Israel along the lines in Morocco, it was a discussion that was ongoing, and it's actually still ongoing. But my question that is more relevant is the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia going to affect the Abrahamic Accord? Yes or no, and consequently your answer.
I think not. You see, political negotiations, unlike business negotiations, do not necessarily yield results. We live in a country, Cyprus, there have been many years of negotiations and no outcome. There may have been negotiations before Abraham Accords, but there was no guarantee they would succeed. I don't think the rapprochement would hurt Abraham Accords, but Iran is trying to make it more difficult for Israel to strike Iran, i.e., it does not wish Saudi Arabia to grant access, its airspace, to Israeli jets, fighting jets, flying to reach Iran. And Saudi Arabia wants to prevent or preclude Iranian response, i.e., attacks by Houthis that are backed by Iran on its oil installations. So both have this in mind. It's very realpolitik.
Yeah.
Israel is not particularly happy. The US is not particularly happy because the deal was brokered by the Chinese. China, for the first time, is becoming a major diplomatic player. We're not talking about financial now, economic. Diplomatic player in the region, and now it is going to propose some plan for ending the war in Ukraine. Yeah. This obviously, inevitably, means weakening U.S. influence in the region.
But I'll come in the great powers. China, EU, United States, Russia, the rest of the world. I'll come back to that. Let me just say the following, and let me just flip the coin by going back, coming to the Middle East, namely in Syria. We read in the news that Israel attacked Syria, yet again with specific targets that actually target Iranian interests. Is this what you're talking about? Is this what you're aiming by saying that there's a third country or fourth country where major powers have this competition, considering that the other counterpart has an influence into this country?
Yes, you see, Iran is influential in Syria. It has taken great hits by Israel's Air Force, Israel's missiles, and Russia, that controls to a large extent skies over Syria, has allowed free access to Israeli jets bombing Iranian targets. At the same time, when Iran is closely allied to Russia over the war in Ukraine and supplies Russia with drones to attack Ukraine. So it's a very curious situation that while Russia allows Israel to bomb Iranian targets, and many of them, maybe over 500 targets, in Syria, it's using Iranian drones to continue its war in Ukraine. And this is where what you term these shifting partnerships are taking place. So it's very difficult to try, unlike 30, 40 years ago, to try to paint a very reasonably predictable picture of what the region is going to look like in 3-4 years' time.
Okay, let me just go a bit in the more details, if you want, with regard to the great powers. You mentioned China. I want you to give me a minute for China, a minute for the EU, a minute for America, and a minute for Russia on how do they see the Middle East, how do they see West Asia. I know you're an expert at Strategy International on West Asia, so there's a lot to be said, a lot to be told. According to what you're saying right now, there's plenty of research that can be done. The question is, how do great powers envision this, assuming the fact that we will continue to have these, changes in the geopolitical landscape. And as we said in the beginning, these changes are taking shape now in 23 and have an impact not only the financial, but also sociological, economic, political, you name it. Everything is connected. So give us in 1 minute each for these powers, and then we can take a case study of a specific area, namely the EU or the GCC, on the Middle East, and how do we envision things. But I'll come back to this. So just give us a minute, a bit on the great powers, please.
All right, I'll try. China. I think China is a country with increasing influence in the region. Financially, it has invested a lot. Technologically, it has invested a lot in Saudi Arabia, other countries. And now, for the first time diplomatically, it's moving in. It has got huge contracts with Saudi Arabia. It has got some contracts which as yet are not quite clear with Iran. And Iran and Saudi Arabia are the most powerful, sort of two of the most powerful countries in the region. This was something unpredictable 10, 15 years ago, that China would actually move in. This shows, one has to say, inevitably, it shows a retreat or weakness of US diplomacy for China to come in. So I see increasing role for China. They consider it very, very important culturally and economically. Still, despite the green energy, still for some time to come, the world is dependent on hydrocarbon, and therefore the gas and oil in the region will be needed by the rest of the world. On the question of the United States, for the waning influence, they have managed to upset their partners. With Saudi Arabia, if you remember, President Obama 3 times on international network asks for the ousting of Mubarak. I mean, this was contrary to all norms in international law. You cannot openly ask for ousting of another country's president, even if he's unpopular. But he did that, really pushed them, maybe rightly so, on the question of Khashoggi and how he disappeared. And generally on other issues as well with Saudi Arabia, it hasn't been. When Iran, the Houthis attacked Saudi Arabia, United States did not respond in any way that would deter any further attacks on Saudi installations. And the Saudis have noted that. So somewhat, I don't think they have divorced, but it is not as warm, perhaps, as it could have been. Also, on other countries, I think Egypt, also, I mean, now we are going to North Africa, but on other countries, Iran, well, is, as you know, the situation with United States. So I would say United States at the moment, particularly with current administration's approach, is a decreasing influence. EU is very cautious. EU is very cautious, and here we have to say, when we say EU, we are not including United Kingdom anymore. They are not in the EU anymore. They are supportive of Abraham Accords, but at the same time, they want Israelis to be more lenient to Palestinians in the negotiations, in their approach. They have, even though they've established regular contacts with the Israeli foreign ministry and they meet regularly, but they are not quite happy, the European Union, with the kind of approach particularly this government has taken to annex all the settlements and in fact asking the settlers to go back. They are not happy. So the Arab-Israeli dispute is still very important part of the European Union's approach to this region.
I mean, again, we're opening a great deal of questions with these regards. So I'm just going to try to keep it like as punctual as we can. But as a case study, Cyprus is in the corner edge of the EU. Mm-hmm. It is located in Southeast Med. All the things that we said are very important with regards to the Middle East, to the strategic partnerships, to the probable strategic alliances that are being built right now. They are very important considering the trilateral or multilateral. They're very important with regard to the resolution, if any, for the Cyprus issue. What can the European Union do? What can Cyprus do on the element of negotiations? Because one of the things that I anticipate, at least that's how I see it as a scientist as well, is that things are not going to go more peaceful into the night. They're going to go more aggressive politically and economically, exactly because of the changes that are going to take shape in the next year or two, financially, banking system, technological system, and innovation, movement of capital. The fact that, as you correctly put, the Chinese is trying to be more engaged. It initially started with Afghanistan, then they went to Iran. They have also tried to go in Iraq. They're going into Syria, and we're going to have the opportunity to hear out from also other experts about their own opinions with these regards. But it is extremely important that we understand and comprehend what is the role of countries such as Cyprus, which belong to the European Union, considering the fact that they're neighboring the Middle East. They're neighboring these troubles. Where do we stand? What can be done? Who can be associated with this? How do we boost more peaceful resolution of conflicts? How do we boost more trade, more balances, more interreligious dialogue, more Europeanization and values that the European Union presents? What is your take on this, considering the latest events in Syria, the latest events in Lebanon, the latest events, let's say, even the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia?
It's a very good question. I remember when we established a dialogue chair in Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Nicosia, in my talks with the government in Cyprus, the foreign ministry, was that Cyprus is not utilizing its geographical and cultural position as a bridge between East and West. At the time, I remember this question of clash of civilizations and dialogue of civilization was a lot more talked about than today. Cyprus still has that position. It can relate both to the East and the West. Geographically, it's in West Asia, but not of West Asia, is of European orientation. Already we see a lot of, even though it is not much publicized, a lot of effort in terms of Palestinians and Israelis meetings takes place in Cyprus, but of course it's something that's not much talked about. I think greater work can be done if Cyprus agrees to undertake the role of promoting greater cultural understanding between different camps. There was a time when Cyprus may have felt very vulnerable and very kind of hostage to the problem of Cyprus and the occupation of the northern part of the country. But now being a member, a full member of the European Union, it must have, I think, feel sufficiently secure to take steps, to be courageous enough to take steps in a direction that befits its cultural heritage and geographic position.
This is great because, you know, one of the reasons why we teamed up, if I may say this, is exactly that dialogue of civilizations that Strategy International is trying to promote. In fact, we are attempting to discuss conflict resolution elements at the level of resolving them. And it is there's no greater place to discuss this in Cyprus because this is a frozen conflict. And because it is a frozen conflict, it also gives us the opportunity to discuss pending issues and interconnected issues, from the Israeli-Palestinian issue to the Iranian-Israel issue, to the Saudi-Israel relations, for example, to the problematics that Syria has at this point, to the financial problems that Lebanon has, and to also show these trilateral alliances between Egypt, between Jordan, between Morocco, between the UAE, and how can things take place. So what comes out of our discussion today, and allow me just to say this, and you may add this last point if you want, is that cultural diplomacy matters, negotiations matter, good political standing point matters. In this case, this is where the EU comes along. Willingness and political willingness from the countries in the Middle East and the Gulf does really matter because it has a positive or negative impact. And as we said, we're yet to see challenges and changes in the anticipation of how strategic cooperations, if you may say, are shaped, or even alliances are created in this case. So just give us your last input on this. I don't know if there is something else you wish to add, but understanding is a must. So if we were to ask you, give us a last sentence straight. What do you think? Where are we standing? Where do we go into this? What's your input into this?
I think I like that question. It's a good both the climax and the finale to our discussion. I worked on, and I still do work on, the dialogue of civilizations. it is not politically correct to say this, and I don't usually say it in public, but we have seen that the trend in international politics has been of the kind that Samuel Huntington charted. We've seen now that that Russians and Chinese and some Islamic countries getting together. I don't want to overemphasize that.
Even more so in a financial concern, BRICS, it seems that its GDP is increasing, its impact is increasing. They're trying to have an extended hand in Latin America. So, yes.
The reason now it's going that way, but it can be stopped. I mean, we have the power and ability and resources to prevent that from going further. We have to decentralize our efforts to bring about a dialogue between cultures. That is, we should not allow states to dictate dialogue of civilizations, because states are primarily there to protect national interests, not civilizational interests. Civilizations are much bigger than states. Therefore, this is something that has to be undertaken by filmmakers, sports people, different syndicates, students, people of all walks of life, to come and get to know one another, because you are much less afraid of anything when you get to know them. Always the unknown is more frightening. And therefore, bringing people together is the key. But realpolitik and the exclusive system of a statehood that we have in the world, I'm afraid, is not conducive to bringing people together in a manner that they would get to know one another better and respect one another better.
That leads me to complete, if you want, the third quarter, if you want, of our discussion. I really want to open a bit and even go into more detail. You just started with, well, you closed that section by opening another section that is called leadership. Mm-hmm. It seems that throughout these elections taking place in our region, in the European Union, always the element of leadership is there. The question on what should be the leader and under which conditions should this leader be, what is the representation, what are the policies, what are the obstacles, and so on and so forth. The first question that comes along is, have our leaders understood these changes that are taking place? Because you just mentioned that states have their own interests, but eventually others should lead in that dialogue that unites themselves. And it looks politically correct, but not operationally correct, because usually states take the decision to bring people or to allow people to come into the discussions. But or you might call this as diplomacy. But what you're actually extending into is a third pillar, if I can call it this, which is more the social pillar, the scientific pillar that brings people in for those negotiations. So the question that comes back to any leadership at this point is, do leaders understand and comprehend what is happening in the world? Do they allow, or is there a plan for more negotiations, for more elements? This planet, at this stage, in 2023, is not peaceful. It is not peaceful. And it is not anticipated that the Ukraine-Russia war is going to end real soon. And it is for this reason that all these economies are now being reshaped one way or another, internally or internationally. So the question to you is, do they understand leadership? Is leadership efficient in practice? Does it have a positive impact on people and on their wishes to do more trade, more business, to travel around, to be with the necessary key people in key roles to invest in country A or country B? And allow me to politicize this. It was a statement made by the Foreign Ministry of China saying that the United States is no longer. And it was Secretary of State Antony Blinken that came 2 days ago, and they said that even this rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia under the, if you want, auspices or the umbrella of China and he clearly stated is just wrong because it's surface. It is not deep. So explain to me leadership, and explain to me the depth, and explain to me the practice, if you can, please.
Do leaders know what's happening? Yes and no. I think at individual level, intellectual level, I think a lot of leaders know what is happening, but I'm afraid they are caught in this populist politics, which has undermined and threatened, I think, the future for us and for our children. I remember a time, you as well did, when we had leaders who were leading. Now leaders are led by those who elect them. So there is that question. I'm afraid, do they understand? Perhaps some of them do. But they are engaged, nevertheless, in populist politics.
Are we talking about augmentation of politics in that respect? Because we also see either two young people trying to get elected, which is a good thing in somehow, but there is a need for experience, or we see people that are expected to lead considering these changes, or countries that have somehow extreme cases of leadership that they consider that they should change. For example, Hungary, that is European, but nevertheless wants to be part of a good relationship with Turkey, for example, or a good relationship with Russia, and goes on and on and on.
You see, if you're talking about Western-style democracy and leadership in those countries, then we have shortfalls, I'm afraid. We know democracy is in the style that we are practicing it now in the West, is based on two important elements: media and money. Sure. People vote according to the pockets, how much money they have, and people are hugely influenced by the media. And these two, is media democratic? Do we choose who runs the media? No. Do we choose who runs the finances? I mean, I'm talking about corporations, international corporations, the banking system. No, we don't. So these are the short.
We do not control the financial.
Well, I mean, let me say 2008, the banks caused a major crisis in the American economy, which affected the whole world. Do you know of any banker who went on trial?
Actually, there was a lot of swift changes in the legal element aspect, yes. And a lot of bankers have been accused for a great deal of things, but not for the global banking fall down. But it has also to do with regulations, I think. I mean, that's my thought. I mean, I'm not a banker, but regulations are the reasons why all these banking systems have changed. But the question that comes to my mind is 2008 coming back now in 2023? We saw what happened in the banks in the United States. We saw what happened to the Swiss bank and how the Geneva bank tried to save it. And we also know that some of them are shareholders who happen to have interests with this geopolitical and geostrategic landscape change.
The short answer to your question, yes, 2008 will come back. It will come back. I mean, my question is, do you know of anyone who went on trial and was convicted is in prison? No, no one. 2013 in Cyprus, Lagi was shut down overnight. Anyone went on trial. Anyone went to prison. It will come back because there is a more.
But there was a great deal of parliamentary committees that were established about how he came about and so on and so forth. But my question is not whether this was a success or not, but the question is the banking system ready to receive leadership skills, and if there are any leadership skills, in order to avoid that 2008 case? This is the most important thing, because you see, I believe that people, as a professor, you're a professor as well, I believe that people care about very, very specific and tangible things. These banking systems, for me, they're always going to change. And they're always going to reflect the challenges that are ahead of them, especially because they do risk assessments. And so do we, by the way, at Strategy International, as well, that we do those risk assessments. The question is, can the banks do the risks the risk changes, considering that leadership wants these changes. And can these changes be reflected not only in the banking system, but in the trade system, in the political negotiations, in the way that we negotiate? Because if there is no political will, there's not going to be any kind of peace resolution to anything. And we're going to remain with the term resolution of conflict or peace or resolution of conflict. An example case, last week, there was an agreement between the European Union and Serbia and Kosovo to resume negotiation talks on specific elements in order to avoid any sort of downfall, because we're nearing a possible even conflict in that matter, considering what was taking place in the last 2-3 months. So where do we stand on leadership?
Leadership. Leadership matters, but there are two foundational problems, one more than the other, with the international economy. First is that profit is no longer linked to wealth creation or adding value, and that has reduced wealth creation.
Absolutely.
And that is partly why 2008 happened. That is a foundational problem. Secondly, banks have been given a free hand to do what they want. Bank of England printed 23 billion pounds in 10 years. In the same period, if I'm not mistaken, the banks issued 1.3 trillion pounds, what we refer to as fake money, that is giving credit to us, to people, to spend money for which they have not deposited any money with the Bank of England, which we are supposed to. So in effect, they are printing money, and there is no regulation stopping them from doing so, and they are making money on that because we are paying them back with interest. So these foundational problems have to be tackled with leadership. It has to start by the G7. They have to start regulating the banks, and then the media later. And then it has to go to the UN, a wider platform, and be approved internationally. Without those structural changes, good leadership cannot do much. And without good leadership, those structural changes will not come about.
That's very interesting to say, and thank you very much, Professor Farid Mirbagheri, for joining us today, this web series talk of our prime analysis. It was a great pleasure to have you together with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for this great discussion, and I look forward to having more and seeing more of your written expertise and abilities of discussing the world in 45 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for watching Strategy International. This was Prime Analysis and your host, Mario Eftimiopoulos. Please subscribe to our channels and follow us on our social media. And remember, impact makes a difference.